Hello folks, we are witnessing chess history in the making. A rising star, the likes of which we haven't seen since maybe ever. Based on the way the young Faustino Oros is already playing at age 10, we have to assume that he is probably going to surpass the ability of all the top players alive today, including the great Magnus Carlsen. Case in point is this most recent defeat of Hikaru Nakamura in this 3-minute Blitz game on chess.com, with the black pieces no less. Hikaru kicked off the game with knight to f3, and then followed up with the relatively rare b3, known as the Zucker-Tort-Larsen attack. And after g6 from Faustino, we already have a position that is seen in less than 1 out of 1,000 master games. Hikaru's saying, let's just get this youngster out of his book and play some chess. We've got the dark squared bishops facing off on the long diagonal here. Hikaru staking his claim in the center, opting for a d4, c4 setup. Meanwhile, Faustino goes for the double bishop sniper nest. And what do you think, guys? d6 or d5? Which move would you play here? Both moves are very playable, but Faustino chooses d6, going for the less symmetrical pawn structure and keeping that diagonal open for his light squared bishop. We have some imbalances here, and a key moment coming up where Faustino makes his big debut on the 5th rank, striking in the center with c5. And now for the big question, should white push d5 or not? To me, it's a no-brainer. I would play d5 without even a second thought, opening the diagonal for my dark squared bishop and shutting out black's bishop on b7. But it's not really as cut and dried as you might think. Black's going to be striking at the white pawn structure with moves like e6 and b5, while white will do his best to support it with moves like e4, and it's still anyone's game. So Hikaru does not play d5, but instead maintains the tension with rook to d1, lurking opposite Faustino's queen, which Faustino takes a move to get off the d-file right away. After knight to c3 from Hikaru, we reach this critical moment where Faustino really needs to take on d4, and if white recaptures with a pawn, you can follow up with d5. But instead we have an inaccuracy. Rook a to d8, after which Hikaru jumps at the chance to play d5. Now this is a new and improved d5 from the one we just looked at, because here Faustino is not able to attack the pawn structure immediately due to the presence of Hikaru's knight on c3. b5 is obviously not working, and e6 would lose material to knight to b5, hitting the queen, followed by d takes e6, f takes e6, and knight taking the pawn on d6. So in the game, Faustino has to take a move to stop knight b5. He plays a6. Hikaru responds with e4, achieving a nice pawn wedge. Rook f to e8 prepares e6, and now bishop to f1 from Hikaru, who, despite appearances, did not just choose to move a piece at random. He's actually preparing knight to e2, which would open the diagonal for his dark squared bishop, but at the same time, you're rendering two other pieces less useful. That is the knight on e2 and the bishop on f1, whose diagonal has now been blocked. Stockfish instead suggests knight to d2. That way, after black plays e6 and captures on d5, you got c takes d5, and you're clearing a nice post for that knight on c4. But I digress. What's played now by Faustino is e6. Hikaru expands on the queen side with a4, and we have the pawn exchange on d5. And now Faustino should just keep it simple, double the rooks on the open file. You know, as hard as chess can be, there are still quite a few positions where the best moves are just fairly straightforward and obvious. What Faustino goes for instead, though, is knight to g4, finally opening up the eyes of his sniper on g7 and planning to hop into e5 next. But e5 is not really a stable square for the knight. Stockfish is giving a healthy advantage to white after h3, knight e5, and then knight to d2 with f4 coming. But Hikaru is committed to his knight to e2 plan, so that's what he does. We have knight g to e5, and again, knight to d2 is best, but Hikaru jumps into g5. And after h6, posts up on e4. Now best for black here is f5, just kicking the knight off e4 and then following up with knight to f6. But Faustino goes straight for knight to f6. So what's the big difference here? Well, here white could make life difficult for black with knight takes f6 check, bishop takes f6 followed by knight to g3. And then when the time is right, you can play things like knight to e4, hitting the dark squared bishop, and then f4 and force the trade of the dark squared bishops. Then there's going to be the threat of knight to f6. Now there are things black can do to defend, and the game is not over or anything, but white is definitely in the driver's seat here. But getting back to the game, Hikaru played knight to d2, allowing that knight to remain on f6, bishop to c8 from Faustino, threatening bishop to f5, hitting the queen, hence the move knight to g3, watching over that square. And at this point, Faustino realizes that he is the one who is now in control of this game and goes on the offensive with h5. h4 is definitely coming next. Hikaru accurately has assessed that he's in no real danger and simply continues rook to e1, allowing h4. And while it's true that Hikaru is just fine here, he really needs to play the correct move. But unfortunately, he does not. He has a case of what we call seeing ghosts. That is, he is seeing threats that are not really threats. Since that is the only way to explain why he did not make the move knight g to e4. This is what white needs to play. So what was Hikaru so afraid of here? Well, I'm guessing he didn't like knight takes e4, h3 when the pawn cannot be captured, or else there would be knight f3 check with a fork. You can play f4 though, and if h takes g2, white can actually leave that pawn on g2 for the moment and get a winning position by playing bishop to e2. But if Hikaru actually calculated this far, he might have been looking at what happens after bishop takes g2, when black can throw in the tricky knight to d3, hitting the rook, hitting the bishop, and of course if queen takes d3, bishop takes b2, followed by the bishop posting up on d4 with check. That's very strong for black, might have been what Hikaru was afraid of, but what he played in the game was just as bad if not worse than this. He played knight to h1. Now if you're wondering why he didn't play knight to e2, it's because after Faustino's next move, bishop to f5, driving the queen back to d1, the light squared bishop really needs to be watching over the d3 square, or else knight to d3 would just be curtains. But now Hikaru's knight is on an absolutely pathetic square, and Faustino pushes forward with h3, which is actually a mistake. But Hikaru, who's again seeing ghosts everywhere and totally demoralized by the way this 10-year-old is pushing him around, fails to find the correct defense again, which is simply g takes h3 followed by knight to g3. What exactly frightened him about this line, I don't know, but what he played instead was the abysmal g3, shutting his knight out of the game, handing Faustino the win once again, who only needs to play the obvious looking knight to d3, but he again gives Hikaru a chance to escape with the move knight to h7. Probably wanting to play knight to g5 at some point and target the big hole on f3 with the help of bishop g4, but this again gives Hikaru the chance to save himself, and this time it's with the move f4. And if knight d3, you just trade a bunch of pieces and you still have that bad knight on h1, but Faustino has kind of a bad knight himself on h7, and so white will have time to sort of reorganize and will be just fine. But apparently Hikaru was afraid of the move knight to f3 check with the discovery on the b2 bishop. It's not anything to worry about, and I'll leave that line to you to calculate if you want. It's not that difficult, but Hikaru now gets overcautious and adds some defense to that bishop with rook to a2. And here Faustino missed a beautiful tactical shot. Bishop to g4, which would have been completely crushing. Point is that if you block with bishop to e2, then there's knight to d3, since that bishop is pinned to the queen. And if you play f3, here comes bishop takes f3, knight takes f3, knight takes f3 check, queen takes f3, and bye-bye rook. But the move played by Faustino in the game, queen to d7, yet again allows Hikaru to escape with f4. The knight gets to d3, again giving Hikaru the chance to trade off some pieces. He just needs to begin with rook takes e8 or bishop takes d3, which he does not do. Instead, playing the unfortunate bishop takes g7, somehow forgetting about rook takes e1. A devastating in-between move which wins a whole rook while attacking the queen. It's game over for Hikaru, he knows it and resigns. So quite an incredible oversight by Hikaru, which can only be explained by the attacking prowess of this young prodigy, keeping the pressure on, posing Hikaru difficult problems to solve on almost every move, which eventually just wore him down. So that's how you play Blitz, my friends, It's about aggression and not perfection, but this kid is already insanely accurate for his age, and as I said before, he very well could be the next Magnus Carlsen, or maybe even much stronger than that. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you found value in this content, and I will see you on the next video.